Get jewels for some other men, I'm looking for a brothership.
Get it right, this real life, we tired of struggling. Airtight on this shot, no more dysfunctioning. We reeling in the sunken and we bringing in our brother in. The battles that you face and be a cannon without comforting.
No disrespect to my sisters at all, but it's the barbershop talk. Talk the kid at the ball, I'm talking waves. And just a little hustle to get paid. And just a little game.
Welcome, everyone. Welcome. This is the first live show of the Brothaship in 2022. And I'm very excited because we've got some good things coming at you for the year. But more importantly, we have a good show today. So I'm going to introduce the co-hosts, Baytrick Bullock from Click Imaging and Bruce Berry, coach extraordinaire. And I'm going to turn it over to Bruce to introduce the special guests because he knows them more intimately than I, and I don't want to mess up the introductions for them. So Bruce, take it.
All right. Well, we definitely have two what I really feel are industry people, as far as from the DJ aspect, from the promotion aspect, from being behind the scenes and dealing with record companies and things like that. We have Vernon Freeland, who is the founder and CEO of Random Access Entertainment. Vernon and I have known each other for years and years. Vernon, from his DJ days to being down at in selling mixtapes, to opening up his own record store, opening up a couple of record stores, Random Access Records, and then moving on to the entertainment side of things. He is the music coordinator for the City of Newark. He also has been an athletic director, basketball coach, teacher for the Newark Public Schools. He is now full-time into his music aspect of things, where he also does once or twice a month, does a residency down in Jamaica at the Treehouse, and is throwing a huge post Labor Day week-long party with people from the likes of Kenny Bobian and Darren Johnson all the way down. So Vernon, appreciate you, brother, for being here. And next is my man Doug Smith. Doug and I have known each other again for years and years and years. Doug Smith is the co-founder and I guess co-CEO of 95 North Entertainment. He has been on the DJ side internationally, locally, the whole nine. Used to do all the parties down at UVA where we met at. Has worked with Strictly Rhythm, does a lot of things with Richard Payton. They've done remixes and made songs. Probably the biggest one is Sunday Shoutin'. That came out on Strictly Rhythm a bunch of years ago. Doug is also an attorney and family man, and just rocks and rolls. So having these two gentlemen on are definitely a pleasure, and I thank y'all, man. I really do.
Thank you, Bruce.
Yeah, likewise, Bruce. Thanks for having me.
All right, so we don't small talk too much. We get right to the subject because I think this is a topic that's so rich that we're going to have a lot of good insight. So I thought, first at the baseline for just the audience, this is Black History Month. I won't get into a political mode, but I happen to believe in my heart Black history is everybody's history because it's such an important part of society. So, I think for us, when I say us, the people in the room, we use this to commemorate it in a short period of time, but it's every day. I think if you were to look at a calendar, every day you could find some type of contribution to society that people of African American descent have contributed to. But be that as it may, let's talk about the origins very quickly. Black History Month wasn't always a month. Carter G. Woodson, who was a historian who we call the father of Black history, started actually Black History Week as a commemoration of our achievements in America in February of 1926. And over time, as we had more consciousness and, dare I say, pride in our achievements. We've made it more of a celebration of achievement. So with that, that's the baseline. And we wanted to look through this through the lens of music. So as you can tell from the powerful guests that we have on, they have a wealth of knowledge. They've achieved at different levels and in different spaces in music. But I thought before we get there, we start from the top. And I think it would be clear if we, and you guys keep me honest, because, you know, this is organic. I'm going to make a statement. I think all of American music is Black music. And the reason I say that is because if you talk about rock, jazz, R&B, reggae, funk, doo-wop, hip hop, and Motown, we'd arguably have a footprint in that. So I'm going to pause there, because if there's any dissent, let's chop it up.
Go ahead, Doug.
No dissent. I totally agree with that. All of American music, you know, which that's an umbrella for everything you just described. Jazz, hip hop, gospel, country, you know, maybe not reggae, but all of that has its origins in Black music. Music from the church, you know, which grew into blues music, which grew into jazz music. And, you know, the perfect example of that, if you look at any interview, for example, with like the Rolling Stones or the Beatles, and they cite their influences, they will always point to Black American artists that influenced them. Chuck Berry and, you know, Robert Johnson, you know, they will always point to them as the starting point for their interest in music. And, you know, I think it would be difficult for anyone to argue that American music is, you know, doesn't originate with Black folks.
And I'll just piggyback on what Doug said, and I'll add something. I'll include reggae because what happened with reggae, those brothers are from Africa, right? They're of African descent, and they created reggae. But I'd also add samba, I'd add calypso to that point, cumbia, funk. So I'm in complete agreement that all music is Black, is rooted in Black music.
I like that. I was gonna retort to Doug's commentary because I wanted to be informed, and I think you nailed the perspective there, because again, I found out only recently that salsa came from the motherland, and I found that out from a brother from Africa, because when he said it, I just looked at it again. You know, I think we seek to understand. I said, nah, man, that's from Puerto Rico. And he said, no, man. And he did it so fluent. I said, oh, man. And he told me the history of it. So, you know, again, that's one of those things. And I think, you know, the information of it shocked me, because he even started like sharing some chords from African salsa that are the exact same basic rhythms of what we hear today.
Sure.
And by the way, Bay is currently, he resides in Puerto Rico. So that brother's there right now in the warm weather, where at least up here in Pennsylvania, we're freezing.
And, you know, speaking about salsa, I mean, I love salsa music. I dance salsa. I love it. It's definitely a fact that it came out of Africa. And when they went to New York, that's when they added all the horns and the brass part of the salsa. So that's how it went. Went through Africa, Cuba, and then up to New York, where they added all the horns. Because you got to remember, you have the Afro-Cuban sound too that comes out of Cuba with Celia Cruz and stuff like that. And she added that African influence. And then when it came to New York, they put in the horns and all of that stuff. That's from my understanding.
I think when you really think about it, the reason why you have music of African origin coming from Puerto Rico and Brazil is because of the diaspora. It's the slave trade.
Drop-off points. Yeah.
It's, the slaves were dropped off in South America. in Puerto Rico, in the Dominican Republic, in Haiti, you know, in Jamaica, all of these places. And so, you know, the folks that came there brought what they knew. And and you know, the intermingling of cultures created the music that we hear today.
Okay, so I think from base one, we can all agree and inform that, you know, our rhythms from the motherland have had an indelible effect on virtually all genres of music. I think now, you know, when we start shaping the genres as they stand today, during this diaspora, many people begin to communicate with rhythms, because once that transatlantic slave trade occurred, we had different languages. And there's two types of languages that are universal: the language of love and the language of music. And that's where the drum was so instrumental in communication from different tribes, because you might have a Wolof tribe or an Igbo or Yoruba. But at the same time, once people began to try to break down those barriers of communication because of different dialects, they began to put together rhythms and patterns. And those rhythms and patterns were a way for some that sought liberation as signals, because there's certain things obviously that you could not say, like "we out of here" in that vernacular. So you had to code it. And as a rhythm, that's actually what began a lot of communication. So, you know, when and we'll get into that with jazz, but that level of improvisation, music became a language within itself. And I think, you know, when we start trying to move forward, those gospels, you know, many of us were brought up in the church at some point, you know, if it was short term or long term, but you know, those spirituals, wade in the water and sweet low, sweet chariot, those were also code words, but they basically express the spirituality as our ancestors were in bondage. So there was where that spirituality and that gospel took root. And I think if I sped forward a little, when we start talking about the evolutions of blues, that gospel blues fusion began to take hold. So I'm going to pause there and get your guys' perspective to see if we're flying the plane right.
So I'll jump in. So I think gospel was obviously rooted through the church, and I think the blues part of that came because, you know, through the hardships that we were dealing with, we learned a way through music to tell it, and not so eloquently as we did in the church, but in a different way, a more
real perspective.
A real perspective, right?
Not
in the good book. Is what we dealt with. So I think that's where the split happened, right? So in the blues, we just talked about just how hard life was and how we needed to get through. I read somewhere that actually Berry Gordy said this about folks in Detroit. He said he had a record store and he wouldn't sell the blues when he initially opened the record store. And all the folks in Detroit, they all worked in the car industry, and all they wanted to listen to was the blues. And he wound up having to close his record store because he refused to sell the blues. And they were just so into the blues. So it was just, that's where music separated, because we wanted to tell our story and people could really understand that.
Yeah, that's definitely an interesting fact, because, you know, during that time you did have obviously the church was a basis and a strong foundation within the African American community, but that was Sundays, like you said, Monday through Saturday, they had a lot of stuff going on.
Right.
And, you know, it wasn't all praise the Lord, thank you, Lord, thank you. It was like, what is going on here? Are you, you know, this is ridiculous what's happening, whether the white man, the job, the this, that, or whatever. And like you said, people began to branch out and say, okay, look, I need to put this in another language too, and
Right.
let you know really what's going on. And then we can praise him and thank him and ask for things to change on Sunday. But Monday through Saturday, this is what's going down.
Right.
And that began the evolution of a lot of things. Obviously, you know, as we'll get into it, I mean, that's the way rap started popularizing.
Sure.
You know,
Right.
I wanted to tell you what was going on in the streets. Yo, yeah, they out here, they slinging this, that, so forth and so on. But Darren, go ahead with what you were going to allude to.
No, this is a great buildup because I think we hit a nail on the head, because commentary, regardless of what era it has been in our history in America, we were using music as a means to an end to express it. So you couldn't tell the quote unquote man that you weren't happy, that you were busting your tail 6 days to Sunday without any holidays. So you sang the blues. I'm tired of working on the railroad all day. That was a commentary. And through our history, and we'll get into it with the James Browns and the Impressions and some of the other, I'll say, conscious R&B, that was the thing. So as early as that, and I'm going to speed the train up because that's where blues came from. It was an expression of a condition, because I never liked blues growing up, because when I heard it, it sounded sad to me. I didn't get it. I didn't get it. No, I didn't. I didn't get it because I wasn't listening to the music. I was listening to the words. And I was like, oh, that doesn't fit, you know, my worldview at that time. But by 1902 and 1909, there was a gentleman named W.C. Handy who's credited as being the father of the blues. He began to really get, I'll say, a groundswell of the genre into mainstream. Reconstruction had just started after slavery. African Americans were at that time building wealth. In fact, at one point, there were more African Americans in Congress than there are today. So there were actually distribution channels of our expression of music at that time. In fact, W.C. Handy's first hit was called the Memphis Blues. So, you know, when we look at that, now, obviously there were more people that were out there like Jelly Roll Morton and so on and so forth. But from a historical standpoint and brevity, in that era, W.C. Handy was considered the father of the blues. So that became, dare I say, the soundtrack of life for many, because it mirrored the condition at that time. And around 1927, a gentleman named Louis Armstrong came with his hot fives and sevens. And that revolutionized jazz at that time. So you had, if you listen to some of the earliest jazz records, the tempos and even the rhythms and chords were still very closely aligned to the blues. That's the intersection. So I'm going to pause there and see if anyone has anything to add from a historical standpoint or viewpoint.
I know you nailed it.
Yeah, you banging it out the park, man. You knocking them out the park.
Well, I think we're going to get there, because I think for the audience, some people have never heard this. So I'm just going to go through a timeline. So we get this jazz, and Louis Armstrong actually was, I'll say, he revolutionized it, but we can't forget some of the other folks like Duke Ellington, one of my relatives, a guy named Count Basie. You know, those were people that started making more composition and making, we'll call it big band, but it was still an element of jazz. Now, at the same time, from the blues route, we go off into jazz where there's more instrumentation and formulation of chords, but we still had blues as a seminal part of people's music. And Robert Johnson is also very seminal in the blues movement. Okay. So between that 1927 and 1930 era, that's where you had the mainstream of music. So you've got people going to church religiously. You still have that influence. You have jazz and you have blues, as I'll quote unquote say, our music. Now, right, wrong, and different, our history has always been one of struggle. And obviously, you know, during the 20s and then in the 30s, we had a depression, and we still had segregation because after Reconstruction, politics and policies were made as barriers to entry into the mainstream. And then we get a lady called Billie Holiday, Lady Day. And she began to actually bring into her communication social issues. The song Strange Fruit, many don't know about and thought it was about some type of freakish apple or orange. But what it was actually saying, if you listen to the words, were really people like us hanging from trees. That was the strange fruit. And that sold millions of records, and it created a consciousness at that time. And, you know, unfortunately, she had her issues with substance abuse, but she brought to the forefront the issues around lynching that were so prevalent at that time.
I just want to jump in right there, and you were probably going to say it, but she was lambasted for performing that song, and often she would not be allowed to perform because it was the threat that she would sing that song.
Absolutely. I mean, and that's why I brought her up, because, you know, while we're talking about music, I think, you know, that expression, that was the social commentary. Now it gets fun because you've got people talking about racial injustice in song. We've got gospel, we've got blues, we've got jazz. And in around 1950, two guys single-handedly revolutionized the scene in jazz: Charlie Parker and Miles Davis. Gentlemen, what are your thoughts about those two guys? What was their contribution to you with your love of jazz and how you understand their mark on the world of music?
Well, admittedly, with Charlie Parker, I'm still learning. My dad was a big jazz fan, and when he passed, he left me his entire jazz collection, and I only just recently started going through it within the last year. And so he's got a whole Charlie Parker anthology. But you know, at least with respect to Charlie Parker, I mean, and Miles Davis, they both not only revolutionized their respective instruments. So Charlie Parker with the sax, right? Miles Davis with the trumpet. But and particularly with Miles Davis, his approach to making music, jazz music in particular, was revolutionary on Kind of Blue. That's the classic Miles Davis album, right? And as I understand it, what he created was a modal form of jazz. So, you know, basically a sort of a main sort of series of chords that the musicians improvise around, which was revolutionary at the time. You know, it's something we probably don't even pay attention to because we're so used to it, but it was revolutionary at the time. And, you know, with that album, I mean, you listen to it today and it sounds like it was made today. It's so fresh and sounds contemporary, right? But, you know, again, I'm still learning. Admittedly, I have a lot to learn about both men and their influence. What I appreciate, I think, most about Miles Davis is that he never got stuck. He always evolved, right? He moved from, you know, Kind of Blue to his electric phase where he was doing, you know, working with you know, musicians that played rock music to hip hop later on in his career, working with Easy Mo B, right? He's always looking to move forward, push the music forward, and never just got stuck in playing one style or sound. And I think that was one of his biggest contributions to music, period.
I mean, Miles was known as being famous during interviews to say, "Don't call it jazz." He said, "That's a label." He said, "Don't call my music jazz. That's a label that you all have put on this thing." He said, "I call it a creation." And he said, "Everything that I create every day is something different. So I'm not falling into a pattern." But getting into that, the whole jazz thing, jazz even brought out individualism in everyone, where you have the breaks. Okay, and it's just the 5-minute drum solo, it's the 5-minute bass solo, it's the 5-minute piano solo, to all come back together to encompass them all, but it was still all individualism. All right, brother, you go ahead, you know, take it away, you know, and he's on the bass and he's just rock don't. That's his own expression of things. It is not necessarily following the musical side of it. It's following the cadence of what they're in, you know, in that 2/4 type step, but he's doing whatever he needs to do to express his own self. And if you obviously have watched jazz and when they go on their solos, eyes are closed, sweat is dripping, they are in their own world, but it's still all encompassing when they come back together. And I think that aspect of music too, even in you know, in gospel, where the solo comes in, you know, and the person takes it, and even though the words are there, it's an ad lib almost of how they're going to run this riff and do this and do that. So, you know, that whole influence of things became expressional for us to gospel, to jazz, to moving into things. Music again became our outlet to express things, you know, Strange Fruit, you know, Billie Holiday, and so forth and so on. So it, like we said in the beginning of the show, it influences everything that we do. You know, Black music has done that.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, Doug hit it on the head. I think while Parker will always be known as that revolutionary that made changes to how the saxophone was played by polyphonic notes, Miles will be revered because that transition he stayed, because he actually played, you know, in big band. Then he morphed and created bebop along with Parker. Then he went into fusion and then all type of other stuff, you know. So you take Kind of Blue, then you look at Bitches Brew, then you look at Sketches of Spain, and then you look at, you know, some of his last work, Amandla, which was a monster, man. I mean, if you got to listen to that to get an appreciation from his starting point to, you know, where he played to his last days, to see just the completeness of his mastery, you know. So let's move on, because now jazz is on the mainstream. They've revolutionized it. People are coming to see African Americans, you know, in all type of venues and buying records. Blue Note had formed, and that had a roster of, you know, a phenomenal amount of Black artists, too many to be named. But in 1959, a guy from Detroit, used to be a boxer, owned a record store, worked actually in one of the Detroit car plants that would help him in his quality control of his music. He finds Tamla Records. And the rest is history. Motown recreates the soundtrack of America. It transcends race. And, you know, I think, you know, we can share stories, but I laugh because, you know, I think you're just watching TV, but even understanding. I went out to Detroit for some personal business and went to Hitsville. What was interesting is that you go in, they had the same control room. And the way it was designed, it was like an assembly line, and they kept the same backing people to do the work, like James Jamerson and all of these guys. And, you know, the riffs are sensational. The Temptations didn't even have a hit for 2 years. Can you imagine that? But anyway, I want to open it up because I'm sure people have stories about Motown as DJs or as just personal folks. What are your thoughts about Motown?
So I actually I was out in Detroit for an event. I went out to DJ, and you know, you can't go to Detroit without going to Motown. And I just found it fascinating. Though only one building remained, he had Barry Gordy had bought most of the block, right? And
Yeah.
so most of the houses, it was a dilapidated neighborhood at the time, and he bought up most of the block. So it's only one building remaining now, and it's the Motown Museum. But when you go in there, as you said, you could feel that whole process going through. As you went through, it was something different up until you finished the product. Upstairs, they said Marvin Gaye would commonly live up there from time to time. I went in the studio. They tried to get me to sing. I'm like, I'm far from a singer, but you know, I'm on hollow grounds right now, so I'll just enjoy that. But it had a lasting impact on me. Just bringing it back to when I play music, when I play parties. As you said, Motown ascended race. Motown was played by white America when their parents didn't want them to play it. They would hide in their rooms and buy the records and not let their parents know what they were listening to. So, and even today, I mean, one of the things I think we have to do as we carry the music forward is continue to play Motown and jazz so that the younger generation will have this as they grow older, and they can pass it on to other generations. So I think that's the impact that Motown and jazz and all the music has had on me. And I feel like I'm carrying on the torch to younger generations.
Great. Any other thoughts?
No, for me, that's you know, nothing to add. You guys got it.
Okay. I mean, and at the end of the day, I mean, Motown, that's, again, one of those things. And we'll get to that when we get to this speed. I think the biggest concern I have from a music standpoint is that we don't seem to be making these classic masterpieces today that exist that we're reminiscing about. You know, Motown, you know, I was saying earlier, 50 years ago, Marvin Gaye made What's Going On. And if you listen to that record today, verbatim, the same issues that he was calling out seemed almost prophetic because they were so relevant then as they are today. You know, I can buy a record that's #1 for my rotation and it'll never see the light of day again. I digress. All right, so now we go through 60s. Jazz is still popping, but you still have artists that are John Coltrane because are there any thoughts about Mr. Coltrane's great? I really connected with some of his work. So are there any thoughts?
Yeah, say that. Ask that question again because you broke up in the middle of what you were saying.
I was mentioning John Coltrane changing jazz after Parker and revolutionizing the tempos as well and going away from bebop. And I just wanted to know if anybody had thoughts about him because he really was a great musician and he was trying to do the same thing I think Miles was in terms of forward movement, but he just didn't have time. He passed away a little early.
Yeah, I think it's exactly what you said. It was just the evolution of things. It is as anything that we do, anything that there is, there's going to be forward progress. So, you know, Charlie Parker and Miles and everything. And then here comes Coltrane, who said, well, we're going to elevate this one more time. And I'm going to elevate it and I'm going to look at it from this standpoint and take it from here, still keeping it within the traditional basic of jazz, but we're going to try to elevate it. And I think that's what any great artists do. You elevate it to the next level. And that's what his contribution was. And like you said, he ran out of time to really get it there, but he laid the groundwork again. You know, he laid it down for others to continue to elevate this art form.
Okay.
And before you leave the, what we say, the 60s, we also got to talk about, you know, Chuck Berry's influence too, how he changed everything. I'm taking it away from jazz and going to rock and roll now, you know, because we influence so many things. And what I was going to say before, not only does the music influence society, but the dress, the hairstyle, everything. I mean, it influences everything when an artist comes out there and they take over society for the length of time they have, you know?
Spot on, Bay, and I apologize because I wanted to speed up and I neglected that. And you are right. As the architect of rock and roll would say, Little Richard, they invented it, you know. And when we talk about rock and roll, the three seminal figures in my mind are Chuck Berry, obviously, Little Richard, and people don't give him the credit that is due because of, you know, the optics, but Ike Turner is credited with the first rock and roll record called Rocket 88. People don't know that as far as, you know, music history. So those three guys, when you look at the Stones, the Beatles, and any of the folks thereafter, took those riffs and tried to run with them. So I think you bring a good point up.
Yeah. Some serious creativity, you know, it's amazing. It's amazing. You know, when you think about it, how being oppressed so badly, but still that creativity just comes to the top. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. And while I speed up, because I want to make sure we get to the current stage, you know, in the 60s, that's when we had so much social commentary. James Brown, I loved him. I got a chance to see him when I was a little kid, and I remember it like it was yesterday. You know, he was a bad dude, man. I mean, the music, forget the music, because it was always on the one. But, you know, Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud was number 2 on the popular charts at one point. You know, I think we can't lose sight of that. You know, I think, you know, when we talk about bringing gospel back, before the resurgence of it, Aretha Franklin comes along in 1967. You know, and she was the daughter of a prominent preacher who didn't actually want her to sing secular music. So had they, you know, won the battle of keeping her in the church, we wouldn't have ever gotten that gift from her. Now, to be fair, before we get back, we have no conversation can be left out in terms of rock and roll from a pioneering stage if we don't talk about Jimi Hendrix. Because after Berry, he comes along, left-handed guitar player, which is rare, and turns it out. And again, he didn't have enough time. He passed at 27. But, you know, nobody was doing what he was doing. I remember hearing a story, I think it was of Clapton, you know, who was pretty much a disciple of him. He went to hear him and got scared the first time he heard him because he couldn't believe what he was seeing. So, you know,
he was left-handed. He was left-handed, but remember, he used a right-handed guitar. He just turned it upside down. That's what it was. He didn't have one designed for him. He just flipped it around and just put the strings in different directions. You know, that right there is off the chart. Like, who would even think of something like that?
A left-handed man.
Right.
All his knobs, all his control knobs and volume knobs are at the top.
At the bottom.
You know, if you look at any of his videos or any of his pictures, the knobs are at the top. It's just like, wow. You know, and be able to, you know, just destroy it the way he did.
So let's move into the 70s, because now we're getting some meat, because arguably the 70s, you have a few different things going on. In 1971, funk blasts on the scene. You got Sly and the Family Stone and Parliament. In 1973, You get a guy in the Bronx playing around with some turntables, start scratching, cool hurt. We get the fundamentals of rap. But then at the same time down in Philly, you got two guys that are making some music called Gamble and Huff. How did that impact you? I know how it impacted me, but I want to ask you guys, because now I'm living at this point.
How did all of those things impact you?
Well, yeah, because they came within a 3 or 4 year period. Yeah. So, I mean, if it was one better than the other, I mean, obviously we all, with the exception of Bay, began playing music, and those were arguably things in our collection at one point or another when we first started. So what are your thoughts?
For me, my entry point into, like, you know, being a fan of music other than the soft rock that I would hear on AM radio was Parliament.
Okay.
My first album was Parliament Live. And I was an absolute, you know, I mean, I didn't want to listen to anything else but Parliament and Funkadelic. I had all the albums, followed everything that George Clinton made, right? And I was familiar with the stuff that Gamble and Huff was making because I'd hear it on the radio, on BLS. You hear it all the time. Frankie Crocker would play those things, right? It didn't resonate with me at the time. It at the time, and mind you, I was in the 70s. I think I was 77. I was 12 years old. So, you know, that music didn't resonate with me at the time. It was my parents' music. So I knew it, I heard it, you know, Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes, Teddy Pendergrass, all that stuff. I didn't develop an appreciation for it until later, but I was exposed to it, right? And then hip hop, obviously, when hip hop came along, I mean, now I was, you know, Bruce will tell you, because, you know, he knows me, but I was like, I mean, when hip hop came along, I dove headfirst into that. That was, you know, what I wanted to, you know, I mean, that was my thing. Hip hop, Parliament, Funkadelic. But I think, you know, later on, when I, you know, again, personally, when I got into house music and started and went to the clubs and started hearing the things that were played, I realized that all the music that I grew up with was being played in the clubs. All the music that I thought was my parents' music was stuff that was being played, and so eventually all of it impacted me. All of it is special to me personally. You know, I listen to all of it. So that, I mean, that's just sort of briefly my journey.
So my experience was just a little different. I had two parents, a mother and father, who they weren't alcoholics, but it was cool to kind of hang out in the corner bar, which they would have their young son in the corner bar, because in the icebox they would sell Yoo-hoos. You know, I know I'm dating myself, but I was you could get a you could get a Yoo-hoo and a Slim Jim in the bar. So I grew up with you know, Al Green and Barry White. So I grew up listening to that. And then I had the benefit of being the youngest in my family. So all my brothers and sisters were older. So here they are with groups like War and Sly and the Family Stone. And, you know, I was getting an invaluable lesson that I didn't know about that just really created a basis for who I am today. So I got those rich roots from my mom and dad and my brothers and sisters. And it was just, I didn't have a choice. It was just kind of ingrained in me, and it paid off.
It's crazy too, because the 70s were great because you had disco and you had hip hop. And remember the necessity of we got hip hop or rap because we couldn't get into the discos, if you remember back in the day. And the brothers took it to the park. And remember, the DJ was the man back then. So you guys were all the men back in the 70s, you know, and the MC was just hyping up the crowd, but the DJ was the man. You know, so and we got that through necessity, where we couldn't get into the discos. So the brothers took it to the Bronx and plugged it into the street lights, and they did their thing, you know. And so it's amazing how history and music too, but it's so ingenious that they take it to all different levels and so many different levels. It's amazing, you know.
I like that you brought up that point because disco was next on my list, but I'm going to put a little spin on it because that was the situation in the city, because you had places that did the velvet rope type of exclusion to keep it like that. But see, over in Newark, a dude named Al Murphy opened a joint up called Zanzibar, and then you had another guy named Reuben Johnson that was opening places. So actually, when disco became popular, and I'll say 76, 77 to be exact, that's when you started seeing places pop up, you know, like Shanique's, the new, you know,
Paradisios.
Yeah, Paradisios and things of that nature. So on our side, and actually, I feel like I want to just burst out and get into that history. But actually, some of the best acts that became legends in the house music scenario were playing in Newark. Tony Humphries, he's not from Newark, New Jersey. He actually came to play because they had a system that was almost as better than the, you know, the best system that's out there. And these guys know what I'm talking about. That would have been the garage. But I digress. I want to speed it up now because the cat's out the bag. So we get this fusion of funk. We get this disco. And we get, you know, Gamble and Huff. And now, like you said, people started making their own music because of society. Now, let me, before I go tie this in a bow, the 80s became an era from a genre standpoint. Now, this is my opinion. You probably had the most richest genres come out across the board because you had neo jazz, I'm going to call it, which was kind of, you know, that Kenny G stuff. You had alternative come out. You had grunge come out. You had reggae get a resurgence in the mainstream. It wasn't invented. I'm not saying it was invented, but Marley, after his passing, you know, after they reconfigured Island Records and got his estate straightened, the distribution of his music hit our mainstream, and it went worldwide. And then you had house, you know, like we could argue about the origins of house. I lived in Chicago for a while. I'd be telling them, no, you didn't start it, you know, and so on and so forth. So, you know, it's potato type of thing. But I think at this point in time now with music, you have R&B that's, you know, come out of a different space through all of those origins. But house is what got the majority of these people. It was a bug that made them do and collect and, you know, play for people. And it wasn't necessarily house music, because what we found out as we started playing for audiences, it was a culmination of everything. So let me stop there, because we have our own unique stylings. And as DJs now, since we're at our point of entry when we got in this game, how did you guys approach it? Did you play what was popular? Did you try to mix up your set and play with new things? How did you approach it when you began?
I mean, I'll start that. I mean, Vernon was getting it in back in the early 80s as DJ Loose Joints down at Rutgers University on Bush campus and getting it in. But when I got into it, and like Doug was saying, he was more of a hip hop head, and how we met, he was doing a thing, and I said, yo, you ever heard of club music? Because that's what we called it up here. We called it club music. We didn't call it house music yet. Marshall Jefferson hadn't come out with, you know, we hadn't really gotten a bunch of things from the Midwest yet. We hadn't gotten a bunch of Chicago stuff. That came like 85, 86. Where it started to drop. So it was club music to us, and club music was that infusion because we had our own Jersey sound. You know, we had people who were making things, but you know, the Gwen Guthries of the world, and and we took a little bit of that Philly sound and we put it in. We called it club music, so it was more of that. We playing that love is a message type stuff, you know, love sensation and things like that. And then we were grabbing stuff out of New York. So in Jersey sort of created its own sound. But yeah, you started introducing. I mean, Doug still says, I don't know. I think so, but we sort of, I've heard him say it in interviews with people that we started house music at UVA, because UVA was a hip hop and go-go when you did the parties there. And I used to be like, Doug, come on, we're gonna play some club. And we would play it for like maybe the last 20 minutes. And people would be like, what? And then that graduation party we did one time, it was like, we ain't playing nothing else but club music. And people went absolutely crazy. So, and people questioning like, y'all bought house? Yeah, we bought club music to UVA. And then, you know, I ended up transferring to Alabama. But that was how I approached, you know, the whole house music, club music scene.
So let me jump in, and I'm going to make it really fast, right? Because I lived this whole thing, right? Because I literally grew up in Zanzibar. I started going to Zanzibar when I was 15 as a club jock. You know, we would go over and hang out with Larry Levan at the Paradise Garage when charades closed. We would go over there, but Bruce talked about Rutgers University in New Brunswick, and so I thought my sole purpose, even though I grew up listening to Rapper's Delight and Jimmy Spicer, Super Rhymes was probably my favorite record. But when I got to Rutgers, I thought it was my job, my position to make everyone a club head, right? And so Rutgers is the perfect place because you get North Jersey and you get South Jersey, and they meet at Rutgers University. So all the South Jersey heads listen to hip hop, and all the North Jersey people listen to clubs. So it was my job to turn all the South Jersey people into club heads. So that's what my whole purpose was. Every party we did, we tried to make it look like Zanzibar in the garage. And after the parties, we would, you know, go to Zanzibar in the garage and bring all that stuff back. And we had some success with it. You know, we turned some heads. But now that I'm older and I do this for a living, I don't do that much anymore. Whatever the people want to hear is what I play.
Okay, Doug, what are your thoughts?
So, you know, when I got into it, I was hip hop. That was my thing. You know, I wanted to play like Grandmaster Flash. I wanted to, you know, do the Adventures on the Wheel of Steel routine. That you know, that's what I wanted to do. I cutting and scratching. Bruce knows that.
It's time, Mick. It's time.
Right.
It's time. It's time. It's time.
And I played, you know, and you know, when I played at parties, because I really got my start in college at UVA, like Bruce said, and you know, I played hip hop, but you know, hip hop, at least then, encompassed a whole wide range of music. It wasn't just Run DMC and the Beastie Boys and LL Cool J. It was Planet Rock. It was Nucleus. It was up-tempo, electro stuff, right? So I'm playing, right, Nafish. So I'm playing all of that, right? So the down-tempo stuff and the more up-tempo stuff. And I'm playing the music that I grew up with in New Jersey. I'm not catering to anybody in the South at all. I'm trying to turn them on to the music that I know from up north. And thankfully, you know, at the time we had a lot of folks from the tri-state area in Charlottesville, so that helped out a lot. And then when I connected with Bruce, and Bruce was like, "You got to start playing some club music," and you know, really got me focused on house. You know, that is when I started to transition to trying to turn people on to that. So this is probably 86 that we, you know, in earnest, really starting to incorporate the music. And what I would do initially is I would try to play records that fit within that sort of electro vibe. So I would play an electro record, then I would play something like Adonis No Way Back, which kind of has that same feel. And so I would, you know, gradually bring them into it. But then, you know, like Bruce said, after a while, we just started hitting them over the head with it. And, you know, we would spend the last half hour, and then we would spend an hour, and we would just continually, you know, just push it. So by the time I left, that's what people wanted to hear more than hip hop. When I left in '87, you know, unbeknownst to me, everybody wanted to hear house music, which was, I thought was fantastic. You know, as I sort of graduated, you know, I began to focus more on house. That's what I wanted to focus on. And really, not only just that, but actually learning and getting more familiar with all the classics that I poo-pooed as a kid, thinking that it was my parents' music, right? I was like, wow, I missed out on a lot. I was closed-minded. And, you know, I remember what really made me realize how closed-minded I was. I went to Club 88 in 1986, and I heard DJ Burt play Love Committee, Just As Long As I Have You. He started it from the break. He started it from when it broke down, and I thought it was a brand new song. I was like, what song is this? Because people were going absolutely crazy. And I'm like, I got to get this song, only to realize it came out in the 70s.
1977.
You know?
On the flip
Right.
side,
So,
Law and Order was on the flip side.
Exactly. And so, you know, part of what I have done, you know, since the early 90s is to refamiliarize myself with that music and become more of a fan of that music. And I actually like to play that sometimes more than house music, because it just has a certain feel and vibe that you don't get from a lot of today's records. So I still play everything. I'm going to, we have a Black Alumni Reunion weekend in April at UVA, and I'm playing an event there, and I'll be playing hip hop because that's what they know and that's what they expect me to play. But, you know, what I normally play now is house and club music. But I can play everything. That's the thing. I come from an era where you played everything. You weren't just a house DJ or just a reggae DJ or just a hip hop DJ. You played the whole range of things. So I can play anything if I have to. But my preference is to play house and club. So.
Wow. So let me tell you my odyssey very quickly. And it's a little bit different because I started playing probably around 13 years old. I'm from Newark originally. I learned on BSRs. And then I wanted to get equipment. My dad was like, look, you play instruments, you won't stick with anything, because I always had my hand in something. He said, get a job. You get a job, I'll pay for whatever you can put up. And I cleaned pinball machines, cigarette vending machines, pinball machines, and jukeboxes. And that's when I got my first B101s. And I look back at that and for you listeners, I mean, I got to go technical. That actually helped from a mixing standpoint because it wasn't actually a direct drive. And at that time in the late 70s and early 80s, people were still playing live instruments. So you had to know those breaks to make the adjustments if you were trying to ride a mix, or else it was going to come in like a train wreck. Yes, so that's how I actually learned. So I actually went to Florida A&M. So when I went down there, they wasn't listening to nothing. And I kept saying, because you had to stay on campus the first year, I was like, I'm a DJ. They was like, yeah, right. So I would bring my tapes, you know, on the I think it was the winter break or whatever. I said, I'm bringing my equipment. And they were like, yeah. So anyway, 85 comes and I got my stuff. Now, interestingly enough, I grew up in the Week Wake section. Kevin Hedge made my first pair of speakers for me. So everybody knows who Kevin is. So I go down to Tallahassee. I got my stuff. I said, there was no Band-Aid approach. I didn't have any hip hop. It was all house. The closest thing I had to rap was maybe COD in the Bottle, probably. I'm just thinking everything was house. So in the grand ballroom, the first party I gave, 3 people came. So my friends were like, man, you ain't no DJ. I said, listen, it's gotta take, man. So I just looked at it very cerebrally, like most things. Where the people from Detroit at? Where the people from Chicago at? Where the people from Baltimore? Because they knew about some place called the Octagon or whatever. I said, that's where I have to go. So I started kind of cultivating it. And I got to a point where it just blew up. I did something. It's no longer. The set is where people used to hang out on Florida A&M University. It's no longer. They expanded. But I got to the point where I was DJing in a club. And I had my mom, bless her heart, she would go to Famous Ramus on Market Street every week and mail me the new house cuts. So I was fresh. I had everything up to date. And I just blew the Band-Aid off and played house. And, you know, there were enough people there from larger cities to go. And then you had just people that were curious. And let's face it, people from the city are cool. So you had people that were going, they may not have liked house, but they liked the vibe, because you got to remember, and this is just how my perspective, I played everything, but I was more comfortable going to Zanzibar. Because when I was going to Bonds or I was going over the Fever, people started getting shot. When I was going to the New Experience, that wasn't my vibe, because I knew if I went to the Garage or I went to the Limelight or I went to Zan's, people were there for the music. And that kind of is what shaped where I was going. Because, I mean, even to this day, when I go mobile, I look at every single exit and I try to be near the door. So if something jumps off, I'm out. I'll get the equipment later. But, you know, those were things that made me realize that, you know, I wanted to play house. And I didn't compromise until I actually started moving into other markets. And I still wanted to do that as a means to an end. You know, I started my career in Rochester, New York. Well, not many people know house. So when I went there, they were like, nah, buddy, you're going to have to listen to the radio. And that's how it worked. So everybody's journey is different. But, you know, if you know the audience and you ease it in, you can do it. So we got about 30 minutes left, and I want to kind of shift the conversation, because as our special guest, you guys have a unique insight on the industry, because this is what you do professionally. I'll just ask the question and throw it on the table, because I didn't know how to pose it. Where do you guys think the music industry is going? Because I have an opinion, but if I had to just throw that out, do you think, let me kind of put some parameters around it. Do you think that the music industry is still lucrative for the artists? Do you think that people still are going out and having fun? And what do you think the future of just music in general is? I'll stop there.
So I'll start. I think it can be lucrative, depending on how you position yourself. I think one of the positives about today's music industry is that, but it's also a negative, is that the price of entry is pretty low, right? And with the advent of social media and platforms like SoundCloud, you can get your music out there without going the traditional route of, let me make a demo, let me take it to an A&R, you know, let me try to, you know, go that route. You have access to people and you can build an audience and a following without going the traditional, you know, route that we've known for the last, you know, 50 years or so. So I think that's one thing. And then I think too, you know, if you know where the money is to be made, you can also, you know, carve out something that's fairly lucrative. So we were sort of talking about it earlier, you know, before we started recording, but those artists that understand that writing and publishing is where the real money is made, can, you know, exploit that to their advantage, right? So that's something that I think is helpful. You know, I don't know how you all feel about it, but the idea that you're going to make money from selling records is, to me, fantasy, with the exception of a few people that can sell, millions of copies of, digital works. You know, I don't think that we're going to see an era again where we're going to have people that are not Jay-Z and Beyonce, and folks and Drake sell millions of records or even 500,000 records, and the reality is that historically that's not where the money's been made anyway. The money's really in writing and publishing. That's where the money is. And so if you understand that and you can exploit that and you can retain ownership of, the mess you create, and you can keep, the labels out of your pocket when you're going on tour or developing merchandise, stay away from a 360 deal where they have their hands in every bit of revenue that you bring in. It's possible for you to carve out a place, but honestly, it's hard. It's hard. I was telling Bruce this the other night, I don't do it professionally anymore. It's more of a hobby. But I don't know what that was. But when I started making house records in the early 90s, I was telling Bruce this the other night, we were signing records to Strictly Rhythm and Emotive, and this sort of not a obviously a huge major label artist story, but we could sell a record to Strictly Rhythm for $1,500 and Emotive for $1,500. We could turn in an EP and get a $1,500 check for that. We might not see any money after that, but we could, get $1,500, and our vinyl record might sell 4,000 or 5,000 copies. And so we could actually make some nice pocket change on the side just by signing those records in the early 90s. Now I don't know of anybody that's making money doing that. I mean, on the dance music side, maybe the bigger names like Louis Vega and some of the others, but I don't know of any label that's actually paying advances for music. I could be wrong, but I don't know of any labels, house music labels that are paying money advances for tracks. So it's hard. It's definitely harder, especially harder in the house music realm. But it's not impossible to make money.
Wow, that's great insight. I mean, I think if I internalized it correctly, you're saying that the barrier for entry is low, but the model's changed as such where you have to think of innovative ways to increase the engagement, because the actual selling of the product probably won't be lucrative.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Now you can, I think again with this model, if you're say a SoundCloud rapper and you develop a following on SoundCloud, right, and that may be leverage for you when you negotiate a deal with a major label potentially. But you've got to think about other ways. I mean, when you think about these artists today, they are trying to monetize everything that they do. Merchandise, concerts, you name it. They're everything they're trying to monetize everything, because they understand intimately that I have to do that if I actually want to make money at it, because I'm unlikely to get a big advance. And even if I do, I may not recoup the advance from a record label, right? And then the sales may not materialize to the point where I can actually make money. So you got to hustle. That's the bottom line. You have to hustle in a way I don't think you necessarily had to hustle in the golden days. That may be an exaggeration, but I think you do have to hustle a lot more.
Doug, I want to follow up on this because you said something intriguing. And if there are young aspiring artists out there, I'd like you to share some nuggets for them. And I know you mentioned some things around the model, and we know that historically in the music business, Black artists in particular have been, I'll say, exploited, for lack of a better term, either through lack of knowledge of the actual um, um, channel of distribution and ownership and masters and things of that nature. What would you advise someone, because everybody, if they are not trying to be a basketball player or a music artist, that seems to be a lot of things that people are pursuing right now. What would be the best advice you would give someone that would be embarking on a career in the industry?
Best advice I can give is get yourself a good lawyer before you sign anything. Get yourself a good lawyer that actually knows the music industry and knows contract law, because all too often, people, um, they first of all, they don't know how to read contracts. They don't know what the value proposition is of their music, and they're more concerned about getting money up front, right? So we'll just use a hypothetical. You know, Doug signs a record deal with Atlantic Records, and Atlantic Records is going to advance Doug $500,000 so Doug can go make his record, right? And Doug is ecstatic. Wow, $500,000. In exchange for that, the record label is going to own the masters, and the record label is going to take half of your publishing. But you don't care because you got $500,000 up front, right? And the mistake there is that that money is a loan. It's not a gift. That money's a loan. And you won't see a dime from the record label again until you recoup everything that they gave you. So if you go out and you spend money on a car and get yourself a fancy apartment and bling and all that other stuff, maybe set aside some to record your record, and your record doesn't sell, you won't see another dime. Not only that, but you've given up a very lucrative source of your income, which is the publishing piece. What artists need to understand is that, again, that's where the money is made. Writers of songs that are registered with one of the performance rights organizations like BMI and ASCAP get money every single time a song is played on the radio, every single time a song is played in a nightclub, in a restaurant, in a grocery store. They get paid for their music because those venues that play the music have to obtain a license in order to play it. And so, in addition to getting a good lawyer, one of the other things I would tell artists to do is learn copyright law. You can go very deep into it, but to just have a basic understanding of copyright law and the rights that you have in the works that you create makes a huge world of difference. One of the exclusive rights you get as a copyright holder is the right of public performance. So that means that every time someone plays your song in public, they have to get your permission to play it. They can't just play it without your permission. The performance rights organizations like BMI and ASCAP perform that clearing service for you as a writer. They're the ones that go out and secure licenses from radio stations, licenses from nightclubs, licenses from restaurants, in order to be able to play all the music in their catalog. And again, every time that your work gets played, you get some money for it based on whatever formula they've created. So an example for me is, back in the early 90s, my partner and I wrote 3 songs for Crystal Waters. None of them nearly as popular as Gypsy Woman, but we wrote 3 songs for her. In 1993, we wrote What I Need, and then in 96, we wrote a song called Just a Freak. It's 2022. I still get money for those songs in 2022, every single quarter. I don't get a lot, maybe a few $100, The point is that I have writer's credit on those songs. I did not give that away. And as a result, I get money from the public performance of those songs. Now imagine someone like Michael Jackson or the Beatles or someone really popular, Jay-Z, that gets their songs played multiple times on the radio every day across the entire country, across the world. Imagine how many millions of dollars they get annually for that. If they signed all of that away, they wouldn't get anything. TLC is a perfect example of that.
Yeah.
They didn't have any writer's credit on any of their songs, but you want to know who's getting paid? Babyface,
Dallas Austin.
all those guys are getting paid because they wrote those songs. And the only source of income for TLC would be their shows and the sales of the record. Well, the sales of the record may have been great, but they certainly weren't enough based on the royalty rate they were getting to pay back everything that the company gave them up front. If you watch that TLC behind the scenes story, they'll show you that, right? They got nice money up front. They were able to fly and everything, but they didn't sell enough based on their royalty rate to recoup the money that was paid. But all the writers are getting massively paid today. And so if you understand that about your work, then you're more careful about what you're giving up when you sign with someone, and you're less focused on, you know, whatever money they're giving you up front as an advance. Now, I'm not saying it's unimportant, but it's not nearly as important as making sure you own the rights in your music. And then the other point I'd make is that a copyright lasts for your life plus 70 years. So it creates a legacy for you and your family, right? I mean, so, you know, if you're a successful artist and you own all the rights, the writer's credit and the publishing, just imagine that. It's yours for your life, and then after you die, another 70 years. That means your family can make money off of that forever. Michael Jackson's family, or whoever owns the rights to his music, going to make money on that music for the foreseeable future. Same with Prince, right? Same with all those artists, because those copyrights survive for a long period of time. So you just have to understand where the money is and not focus so much on selling records, because that's you know, that's part of where the money comes from, but there's a reason why a record label wants part of your publishing, because they know that's an evergreen source of money. They will always get money from that. Your record may never sell again, but if it gets played on the radio hundreds of times a day across the country, they're always going to get money for that. So.
Wow. You know, thank you so much, Doug, for the thorough explanation of it, because I think that, again, someone that's aspiring to get into the industry should minimally take heed to this. So I'm glad we're getting it out in the universe. So again, I appreciate this. I have another question, obviously, since we've got you. And there's been a trend lately of A-list artists selling their catalog. Is there a specific reason for that? Are they just deciding to cash in? I just wanted to get your perspective, because I think Legend, Springsteen, and a few others have decided to do that. What's the thought process behind that?
It goes to show you what's valuable. They're selling their, you know, what did David Bowie sell his catalog for? Like $50 million or something like that. I don't know. Like
which was kind of light. I thought it would be more.
Yeah, tens of millions of dollars. So what are you selling when you sell your catalog? Basically, you're selling all of your rights, your publishing rights in your music, so that other people can make money on it. You're basically getting that money, right? And so that you get a lump sum. And look, there may be all kinds of reasons why people want to do that. Maybe they're you know, they just want the money now. Maybe if they figure they could, if I get $50 million now and invest it, I could probably make more money over the long term than if I just wait for the royalties to come in. Who knows why they do it, right? Who knows? I mean, there can be all sorts of reasons why people want to do that. But again, it illustrates the value of ownership and writer's credit, right? Guess who can't do that? TLC. They can't do that. They haven't written their songs. They don't own any publishing in their songs. They can't do that. We were talking about Whitney Houston earlier. Whitney Houston, saying, I will always love you. Well, she doesn't have any writer's credit in that song, but Dolly Parton does. So if Dolly Parton wanted to sell the rights in that song for a bunch of money, she could. And there's nothing that Whitney Houston could, or her estate could do anything about it. It's Dolly Parton's song. It's not Whitney's song. She just performed it. It's Dolly Parton's song. So, when you understand the value to be obtained from writing or having, a publisher's interest in a song, then you are more careful about, giving away those rights because they can be lucrative. Again, my example, my partner and I wrote three middling songs 30 years ago, and we still get paid today from those songs. 30 years ago. I can count on a BMI check every single quarter for those songs getting played, minimally across the world. So, yeah, I haven't seen a dime from the record label. I haven't seen anything from the record. I haven't seen anything from Mercury Records since we wrote the songs in 1994, 1996. But BMI pays me every single quarter. So,
Vernon, I'm sorry, Doug.
No, I mean, I'm just, that's the point, right?
Now, Vern, you've put out a couple of cuts. You put out a couple of things. Have you experienced the same thing as Doug? But yours was actually on Random Access Records.
Yeah, so I wasn't on Doug's level, but I was the executive producer on a few songs, and Strictly Rhythm actually beat me out for Follow Me because I didn't have a bank that they wanted for that song, so they signed with Strictly Rhythm. But we had some minor success. I get some I won't say hundreds of dollars a month, but I get some interest on those songs still today that came out. We put out 4 or 5 songs on my label. I basically paid a producer in the group to do the song. I was the money behind the song. And as Doug mentioned, I gave them a flat fee of $1,000, $1,500. They were happy. I wasn't so happy because I didn't have a lot of bank at that time, but it worked out for me because we had not only the record, but we had 2 record stores. So we had part of the distribution part, and then I bartered with other distributors who I bought from to carry my record and sell it around the world. So I had a pretty good experience with that.
Cool.
Wow. Again, like I said, I think this is great. And what's interesting is that an artist that we didn't talk about that shouldn't be left out of the conversation, Prince, in my opinion, one of the greatest performers of all time, tried to tell young artists each time he won an award. If you remember, the thing with Slave, the media made it, kind of a goof, but he was making a point and trying to educate at the same time. Therein lies the genius of Prince. But the things that you just articulated, I can remember in some of those shows as he picked up his awards, trying to explain it in very simple terms, the way you did, yet we still have starving artists. We have about 6 minutes left, and I think with the treasure trove of information that you guys have provided, I want to ask one last question for the entire panel. What's going on with music? Now, the reason I'm asking this, and again, I may be an elitist. I've been listening to music for over 50 years. I look at what I have in my library that still is relevant, that still can make me do my thing and my two-step and my spin, you know, and put the baby powder out. That's not happening now. So where are we? What are your thoughts on that?
I'll start it off. You know, and this is maybe contrary to the panel today, but I have to say part of that is age. You know, the hey, listen, and I'm older than you, right? And this is what I'm saying. Part of it's age. You know, it's just a different era, and you know, like we had a different era, like our parents had a different era. It's a different era, and it's maybe we don't understand it. And I play some of the current music, and because I play it, I don't really understand it. I can play Dreams and Nightmares by Meek Mills, and people will go absolutely ballistic. And you know, I'm like, what's going on here? So I think part of it's age, and I think you have to look far and wide for good music today.
Fair. Doug, what say you?
I agree with what Vernon said. I think part of it is age, and you know, if we're honest with ourselves and we think back to the music of our youth. Let's just take hip hop, for example. You know, I remember having conversations with my father, who was a huge jazz head, who had, you know, the radio dial stuck on WBGO every day. And he would say, that's not music. You know, that's, you know, it's garbage. And, you know, this is just taking James Brown, you know, and, you know, and I took it personally, like, this is my, you know, you don't know what you're talking about, right? And I think that there is some truth to the fact that every generation just puts a different twist on music, and the previous generation doesn't understand it, and you know, tries to poo-poo it, but it means something for this generation. And I will say that, you know, my own kids love the music that I play because that's what they grew up on every time I was in the car. But my kids will play things for me that, you know, on site I would say, I'm not interested in that. That's
Right.
You know, that's but they'll play things for me and I'm like, wow, that actually has some musicality to it. The lyrics are actually saying something, you know, there's something there. And so, well, I think we have to be open-minded about, you know, the music that's coming out today. Now, that said, I think that honestly, the real issue from my perspective is the radio. They just don't play a diversity of music anymore. It's all programmed. It's all the same thing. You don't have a Frankie Crocker who could play a whole range of music to, you know, help you become a fan of just music generally. I mean, I learned about the Talking Heads from Frankie Crocker.
Remain in light.
Right. You know, the Police from Frankie Crocker, all, you know, all of these artists. And, you know, radio doesn't, you know, just regular radio doesn't do that anymore. It's very narrow. Then the other issue I think is that, you know, in today's society, everything is focused on the individual and everything is hyper segregated. So you can get into your own bubble and just listen to that, right? And not listen to anything else. And that's a problem. I think that, you know, like Vernon said, you may have to look for it, but there's a lot of really good music out there. There really is. It just doesn't get the exposure
Right.
that, you know, through traditional channels that you know, you would hope for. But if you know where to look, you can find it. And that's the problem. I think you have to work a little bit harder to find it than maybe you did in the 70s and 80s, because, you know, you had people that weren't restricted to a playlist where they got to play the same 30 songs. You know what I mean? So that's my take on it.
Bruce or Bay, thoughts?
Yeah, just final thoughts. I think, it's how we say money rules everything. Somebody's mic is on.
Get on mute.
How money is just rules everything. And there are no more everything is programmed, without a radio station. You don't even have radios anymore per se. You wake up in the morning and turn on BLS and listen to whoever in the car. Everything is streamed. It's XM radio or different things like that. But like you said real quick about Frankie Crocker, could play anything he wanted to. Now everything is programmed. You got to play Drake. You got to play Meek. You got to play this. You got to play that. It has to be played at this time during this rotation. If you listen to radio for a good 2 hours straight or 3 hours straight, you are definitely going to hear some repeats. 4 hours straight, 5 hours straight, you're going to hear some repeats again, because now everybody's trying to get the hustling and get the money. The programming director is making money for the institution or their radio station, because they're getting paid, and advertisers are coming in because everybody wants to hear Jay-Z's new record or Kanye West or so forth. So I think it comes down to the money aspect of everything, and money rules the world. So I think it is aged. There is a lot of good music out there. There's a lot of things that don't appeal to us in what we came through, but those cats is still eating every day, So I look at some of my athletes and I'm like, yo, how can y'all listen to that craziness? And then other times it is it's like, wow, so that's what it is. Bay, your final thoughts on it. What do you think, Brian? All right, he just had to get up and bounce. Oh no. Bay, you there? What do you think about it, Bay?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I have my mic muted. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
I agree with Vernon 100%. I definitely aged out, man. I definitely aged out. I was a big Prince fan, huge Prince fan. I think Prince over Michael Jackson. We should have got into that debate. But
I don't think that, you know what? Let me just barge in for a second. I don't think there's a debate, because you're talking to DJs, and from a creativity standpoint, while I won't speak to them, I'd probably argue that most of us would think that Prince was a better performer because he was musically inclined. Any cat that can play, more than seven instruments and is pitch perfect, I mean, that's hands down. I don't think there's a debate.
Yeah, and, but that's my point of view, and I definitely agree with that. But and we got into the radio thing. Now that everything is live, streaming, so now you can be much more selective in what you want to pick to listen to. We don't have to worry about a Frankie Crocker, a Mr. Magic. We don't have to worry about that anymore, because now everything is streaming. So you pick exactly what you want to listen to. So there's really, the music industry is going towards the streaming side, and you could be much more selective in what you want to hear. So the last 2 or 3 years, I've been heavily into Nigerian music, African music. I just love the rhythm. I love they have a guy out there called Burna Boy that I love, and I love that manly spirit that he has in him. We don't have that anymore. We don't have a Teddy Pendergrass no more. Somebody just straight up man. We don't have
turn it off.
Yeah, somebody's going to take control. We don't have a Barry White no more. With the voice, and the women would just melt. Everybody's soprano and being soft and stuff. We grew up in an age where men were men, women were women, and that's what it was. But now everything's so mixed and crazy. But I definitely think, back to the point, I definitely think I aged out. I know I did, because I can barely. I don't even listen to the radio. I can't take it in any way or form. Some of the rap, some of it a little bit. I think I listened to Kendrick Lamar and one of his songs. It was pretty good. I was like, oh, it's pretty good. The Baby has one song that I listened to a little bit, but I'm mostly Nigerian music, man. I've been getting into that. So,
Okay, well, I'm going to leave you with this thought because I think all of the thoughts were valid. And this is just my personal opinion. As a DJ, regardless where I play music, I have to be inclined to, present it in a way that has some form of creativity, right? So I don't have a problem with it. I mean, I can listen and hear what I want and make it come out, the way the it's intended for the listener, just making it continuous. Here's my thought. I do think that we have a dirge of originality because what's happening right now, and again, I try not to make things political, but that tends to be the root of all things. People aren't reading music. People aren't learning music, So when you think about it through that lens, that's what's stifling it. I'm not saying what's out there is bad. I'm saying that the variety, and I think someone mentioned that you don't have the I'll say the litany of different type of genres and quality that you did. And quite frankly, if you have 5 and I'm going to indict the music industry to a degree, if there's nepotism, if you have 5 producers producing all of the content that's out there, you're going to have a limit of originality in the selections that's out there. So my point is, if there's any point to be made, is I think we have to push the youth to really get into art and more creativity, because right, wrong, and different, we have the capacity to leverage all of the technology, but we've got to get back to the basics and, in certain forms, let kids express themselves versus playing a computer game or something like that. So those are just my 2 cents. I want to personally thank Vernon and Doug for joining us. This was the best show that we've had since we've been on the Brothaship. I'm not saying that because you guys are on. I'm saying it because the topic was something that I think interested people, but most importantly, you guys had a perspective and an expertise that you shared that I think is going to benefit the listeners, and I appreciate that.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate this. This is a great discussion.
Come on, so we help each other grow. That's how our communities blow.
Yo, sub, you got a sec? I need the bill.
Yeah.
Well, I think
that was that remix. That was the remix.
Yeah, we went a little over, but no, thank you. I really appreciated that. And what's funny is that Bruce always says, "Yeah, Doug, we've never met." So, and Bruce and I have been friends for 50 years. So, go figure.
Yeah, and it's vice versa. I'm always like DJ.
I'm surprised that you never came to any of the New Year's Eve things, or maybe you did.
When? Where?
Like way back in, I used to have him over at my parents' house and stuff. Because Darren was like always doing something. No, he.
Come on, so we help each other grow. That's how our communities blow.
Yo, sub, you got a sec? I need the bill for a minute.
What's up?
Matter of fact, you could chill for a minute.
Okay.
I need a platform where we could talk about some other shit. Get jewels for some other men. I'm looking for a brothership.
Get it right, this real life. We tired of struggling. Airtight on this shot, no more dysfunctioning. We reeling in the sunken and we bringing in our brother in the battles that you're facing. Be a cannon with our confidence.
No disrespect to my sisters at all, but it's the barbershop talk. Talk the kid at the ball. I'm talking waves and just a little hustle to get paid and just a little game.